You've probably heard of Fortnite. It's a game, and more than a game, a cultural moment that swept in with all of the force of Pokemon Go and arguably more of the staying power. There's the game itself, but there are the dances, the addictions. Now, here's a twist. Fortnite has competition. Electronic Arts a month ago dropped Apex Legends, its own multiplayer team combat game, and it might be hotter than Fortnite. It has grown as much in a month as Fortnite did in 4. Fortnite's developer is already copying features. So, what does the style of game do that's so different from what came before, and how big is the money involved? How does it fit into the future of esports? Welcome to Fort Knox, rich ideas and powerful people. I'm John Fortt of CNBC here at the NASDAQ market site overlooking Times Square. Later in the show, you're going to hear from Sienna CEO Gary Smith. Hear our conversation about how he grew up in a small mining town, skipped college, but ended up becoming one of the longest tenured CEOs in the business. Don't miss that. But first, let's break down this gaming revolution. Joining me this week, Tim Clark, Global Editor-in-Chief and Brand Director at PC Gamer, Miranda Sanchez, Senior Editor at IGN Entertainment, and joining me a bit later, Rick Heitzman, First Mark founder and partner, and Bruce Stein, Axiomatic co-founder and CEO. First, though, Miranda, I want to really hone in on what makes Fortnite, Apex, this kind of battle royale era different from what we've seen in gaming before. How is it different, the way these games work?
So with this, we always see some sort of multiplayer phenomenon kind of rise. Yesterday, it was Overwatch with hero shooters, and now we have Battle Royales, which is kind of like this great evolution of multiplayer shooters. And what I think is really big here is that these games are free. Like, you look at Fortnite, that's free. It's super available. You can play it on phones, you can play on your Switch, you can play on Xbox, you can play on PC, and you can play with your friends across those platforms in certain capacities. And Apex Legends has come in and said, hey, we are coming from a great studio that is great at developing shooters and has been paying attention to all these other battle royales that have come out and is implementing different assets that kind of improve on everything that's been established.
Tim, where did this come from?
Well, as the name suggests, Miranda mentioned Battle Royale. It's kind of, if you've seen the film The Hunger Games, it's actually a lot like a Japanese film, Battle Royale, where you have like 100 contestants dropped onto a map. The map then shrinks in size. If you're outside of the map, then you're killed off. And it's kind of survival of the fittest. You kind of rush around the map looking to pick up armor, items, the best weapons, and then pick off the other players until it's only one person left surviving, and then you're the winner.
So kind of like the global economy in this decade.
It's a brutal metaphor for capitalism in a lot of ways. The thing that's interesting about the genre, one of the many things that's interesting about the genre, is that what Fortnite did, in some ways, is what Apex is benefiting from, which is to create an audience which can now move between these games because they're very familiar with the mechanics and the tropes of them. And one of the things that Apex did, again, as Miranda said, it came from a really storied studio in Respawn Entertainment. It brought with it a couple of really interesting innovations in terms of how you communicate with other players. You could look anywhere on the screen and ping an item or an enemy, and it'll tell the people you're playing with, hey, there's a cool gun over there, or there's a dude hiding behind a tree, you should be wary of him. And that meant you could really easily interact with players without having to worry about actually like using a microphone and potentially exposing yourself to the toxicity which sometimes comes with online games.
Right.
It had another interesting mechanic, which is that you can respawn your teammates, kind of like the name of the developer, when they died, which is something that Fortnite previously didn't do.
So they're working on that now, right?
Well, they're bringing this stuff in pretty damn fast, yeah, because the funny thing is, like, because in other ways the genre, is fairly strict in terms of its rules, that if one game comes along with some very cool and smart innovations, the whole player base can jump ship. And as much as Fortnite seemed like it kind of exploded out of nowhere, there were games before Fortnite. PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds was the phenomenon story before Fortnite.
Yeah,
but that's hemorrhaged player base to Fortnite. And now the question is, what happens to Fortnite if Apex becomes the dominant player?
And I wonder, Miranda, I mean, why didn't Pokemon Go work the same way? Because that was a phenomenon a couple years ago. People were using it just on phones. Is it something about the multi-platform approach of this generation of Battle Royale games, or what? Why do you think people didn't copy that augmented reality smartphone game, and that didn't seem to have this same sort of, I don't know, cult momentum?
So I think my gut tells me with Pokemon Go in particular, kind of mimicking that sort of gameplay is very hard. AR development is, I think, a little bit harder to recreate in that kind of space and have something as notable as Pokemon to drive it. And also with Pokemon Go, I think a lot of people kind of jumped ship after the original 150 were done, like the fanfare was over. People were very attached to those first few generations of Pokemon, which are kind of the first big batches of updates. And then after everyone kind of caught the Pokemon they wanted and they liked, you kind of move on. The thing with Fortnite and I think with Apex Legends, or has the potential to do, is that these games can be iterated on very quickly and improved over time. And that's kind of what we've been seeing with Fortnite and how it is kind of adapting things from Apex Legends, saying, hey, the community is really like these things, so we're going to pull this into our own game and do our own kind of style on it.
And what's beautiful from a business perspective is it doesn't require on like Nintendo or Disney intellectual property in order for the idea to work, right? Like you can do this with fresh environments, fresh characters that don't have to be licensed from anyone else.
Right, absolutely. They're kind of just working with their own material to the most part, for at least for Fortnite. Like they're kind of infringing a little bit on those things, but that's a whole nother topic. But they can like see these trends and say, hey, we want to adapt this for our world and our characters. And I think Apex Legends definitely has a little bit more of a narrative to it. But these two companies are definitely working with their own properties that they don't have to answer to anyone else for.
Tim, when Fortnite hit 50 million registered users, which is where Apex is now, it took Fortnite 4 months to get there. Apex has done it in 1. When Fortnite hit 50 million, that's around the time when they launched smartphone, mobile. It's not clear when Apex is going to do it. How important do you think that is to the momentum of a game like this?
Well, I mean, EA likes money, so I imagine it'll come to tablet and smartphone and Abacus and everything else eventually, I would have thought. You have to assume that's in the game's future. But at the moment, I think, for EA, this is their kind of... This was a big risk for them, right? These games are not inexpensive to make, although Miranda's absolutely right that one of the benefits is you can iterate on them quickly.
How do they do it so fast?
Because if you think about traditional shooter games, you're creating these kind of long narrative campaigns where like everything is bespoke, whereas with this, they're making one map, essentially. It's one... still very detailed and gorgeous-looking three-dimensional area, but then they can just make changes to that map that completely refresh the experience. And the model for these games is like with Fortnite, you have a battle pass where you pay X dollars per month to receive, a bunch of challenges where you can earn the latest skins and other cosmetics, and it's much more of a kind of a fixed target than if you're releasing a new single-player game. You have to create all these high-definition assets for every single area you make, and it's kind of one and done. Once people are finished with it, they'll try and add things to create replayability, but you move on. Games like Fortnite and Apex and the other what are kind of known as games as service in the industry are games where like having one game can be your entire hobby. Gamers are becoming like less omnivorous and more focusing on one particular title, one particular brand,
right.
which in a funny way actually puts them at higher risk, because then if your game suddenly becomes uncool, the whole player base can migrate, and that's probably what's giving them, slightly sleepless nights at Epic, although they're still like the #1 game in town. Let's not pretend.
It's funny, Miranda. I don't let my kids 8 and 10 play Fortnite yet. But they are playing Splatoon, and there are some things, game on the Nintendo Switch is kind of similar. I mean, it's team-based, it's one group versus another. It's online with some limited ability to not really communicate, but at least feel like you're a part of something. I mean, does this have implications outside of even just these two games in the way that people are getting used to playing this sort of team-based online game?
Yeah, of course. I mean, Tim brought up a really great point about the ping system with Apex and how with online gaming, you're always looking for people to play with. Like, even when I was in high school, like, I was playing shooters online all the time with my friends. Like, we come home from school, the first thing you do is you get online, you're playing with your friends all summer, all day, kind of thing every weekend. And kind of going back to Tim's point, I think the communication we're seeing evolve in these video games is really interesting. It's because you don't always get to play with your friends, right? And you also want to have a kind of accessible space for all ages whenever you have these games. And having that ping system that Apex Legends has brought in, it makes a new way to communicate with people without having to have that added toxicity that comes from voice chat. And kind of going to Splatoon, also doesn't really have voice chat, which also makes it, I think, a better environment for people to get into. And so one thing that I've been really interested in seeing is how these games kind of make that a little bit more accessible for all sorts of communities. I see right now we have some League of Legends going on. That doesn't necessarily have the most friendly environment at all times. But, you know, I think having these team-based games just makes gaming just a little bit more special in a way. Of course, we love our stories told of us. Like, one of the best games of last year was God of War, which is an incredible narrative experience that you can't really play with anybody else. But at the end of the day, like, I want to hang out with my friends. I want to hang out with my family across the country, and the way I do that is through video games. So, yeah, multiplayer games have been such a big thing for such a long time, and it's really interesting to see how the trends change every year.
Well, once again, this is Fort Knox. We're talking about, well, Fortnite, Apex Legends, and this new revolution, really, in gaming around Battle Royale, some things around team-based play, free-to-play with some upgrades. And joining us now from Los Angeles, Axiomatic co-founder and CEO Bruce Stein. He is also the director of esports fame Team Liquid. His firm, an early investor in Niantic, the company behind the aforementioned Pokemon Go, and Epic Games, the brain behind Fortnite and a number of other titles. Welcome. Bruce, so how different is this latest wave in gaming from what we've seen in the past? Do you think it has a different staying power or a different amount of influence over how games are going to be made over the next 5 years?
I think you have to start looking at audiences, which is where we come from. We got excited about the gaming audience early on when we said, hey, there's 7.7 billion people on the planet and 2.2 billion are playing games. We like those kind of odds. Then when you look at the esports part, there's 300 to 400 million people playing esports. And you know, we have one of the best, arguably one of the best, without any false modesty, teams with Team Liquid, and the esports audience is around 300 to 400 million, making it the third largest country in the world. So when you start with an audience that size, and the demographics of it are largely 18 to 49-year-old males that are educated, they have money to spend, they have families. It's a different audience than you might suspect of a bunch of kids in their basement playing games. When Fortnite broke on the scene, they did something that was astonishing. They brought into the girls' world a game that they could participate in. And it became a third girls from the start, and it became younger audiences. And as that audience expands, I think you find incremental gamers, not necessarily. I know it's interesting to talk about one game taking an audience from another, but I think we're gaining players that are finding this online community a wonderful place to socialize.
That's interesting. I mean, I've seen numbers suggesting that Epic made, $3 billion profit-wise in 2018 off of this game. Is that right? And have you ever seen anything quite like that before?
Well, I think you have to, get the numbers from Epic as far as what they're reporting. They're phenomenally profitable, but their DNA is based on engineering and gaming. And when you were comparing it to Niantic, I thought it was, and Pokemon Go, I thought that was an interesting comparison, because one of the similarities between what Fortnite has and Epic has and what Niantic has, they both have proprietary gaming engines. Okay, so underneath their games, they have the Unreal Engine in Fortnite and the Real World Engine with Niantic. What that enables them to do is to continue to innovate based on audience needs. And when they see, audiences going one way or another, they see preferences, they can adapt in real time. And that's a real difference in what gaming used to be, when you would just sell a disc and then it would be out there. You have a chance to really identify and satisfy specific consumer needs. And
Niantic's got the Harry Potter game coming out, which to me is exciting. I read all of those books to my kids, and it seems like something they could get into maybe even a bit more than Pokemon Go. Tim, I was frankly surprised to see how Fortnite became this thing based on console, PC, and phone. It seemed like, at least in some media circles, there had been this narrative developing that smartphones were where the future was, and that, you know, games were getting more and more rich and more expensive on there, and the money was going to be made there. It seems that instead of smartphones alone being the future, it's like the model, the gaming model that started on the smartphone just exploded into all these other platforms too.
Yeah, and there's, I mean, it's interesting to note as well, there's still like a resistance amongst, like, in inverted hardcore gamers to the phones and tablets as a thing.
Screen's so small.
Well, they you know, they kind of sometimes see it as like a lesser experience encroaching on their more kind of complex and detailed games, but I'm sure we'll see those lines keep blurring. There was an amusing kind of moment at BlizzCon, the event Blizzard hosts every year, where they announced a new Diablo game, which everyone thought was going to be for the PC, and then it turned out it was for the phone, and they were pretty much booed at their own conference. So it can still be kind of like a fraught space between the two. It's not always
kind of like
smooth sailing.
Spielberg versus Netflix, in the sense of like, how big a screen do you need to have the full experience, and should the Oscars be, you know, accepting that? Is a smartphone kind of like Netflix in that, and the PC kind of like a Spielberg cinematic blockbuster?
I mean, I just bought a 65-inch OLED TV, and I'll probably plug my PC into that sometimes to play games. Sometimes you might be asking the wrong person. Yeah, I think, like, yes and no. Like, I think going back to Fortnite, there's always been a craze in gaming, right? And especially, you know, with youth culture, there's always something that breaks out in this sort of way. We'll see the sustainability of it. Pokemon was an interesting thing to mention, because I think that did not flame out, but certainly, like, it had its moment, and then you know, the mainstream kind of moves on to do other stuff, and right now that's you know, undoubtedly Fortnite. One of the things that's super interesting to me is, like, the money that Fortnite's generated has essentially paved the way for them to become their own effective platform holder and storefront now, and take on Steam, who have been the dominant platform in PC gaming, certainly for a long time, owned by Valve in Seattle, where the vast majority of PC games are bought and sold, and Epic now, off the back of Fortnite, is challenging that. That's probably going to be the most significant battle, I think, of this year, and something we've been writing about a lot on PC Gamer.
Yeah, Bruce, another piece of this is the entertainment value for people who aren't even playing, who are just watching. It used to be that was the worst position to be in if you were the one kid in the room who didn't actually have a controller, had to watch other people play. But now it seems like with esports, there's this entirely new business being built on the idea, hey, you don't have to play the game. Just know who the players are, watch it, get entertainment out of that. How much of that is a piece of what makes these games successful, the viewability?
Yeah, I think there's something that we use as a thesis at Axiomatic that's worth considering, which is we look at games as a new media format. It's a culture change in what a generation expects from their content. They want to be able to interact with it. They want to be able to socialize there. They want a community. They want to be able to belong. And even games that now, well, we were talking about Pokemon Go, and is it doing so well? And it still has 35 million people playing it as monthly active users.
Yeah.
I think from a network standpoint, would you be happy with 35 million viewers, you know, actively there?
Yeah,
and then say, well, it's not doing so well.
I wouldn't kick them out for eating crackers, that's for sure.
Yeah, so I think that when you start looking at the potential of gaming as a media format and all of the ways that it can evolve to address different audiences, you can find that there is an ample audience for the pro esports as well as the games that are on a mobile platform. And Fortnite obviously went after cross-platforming, and it was a big part of their advantage. But for some people, the hardcore gamers that are playing League of Legends, like our team, they're not even in the TV business per se. They're in the computer business, which is where they center all their activity. And for them, the activity is always going to be about that content, watching other people play it, and the amount of engagement for those kind of fans, if you look at the hours viewed, is just unreal.
Miranda, I want to get back to the money for a moment, because interesting, the Wall Street Journal had a story, might have been yesterday, about Nintendo dealing with the developers who help with their games on smartphones, saying, you know what, we're not trying to make too much money. We don't want you to really crank up the algorithm in the sense that it forces people to want to pay more for a better experience. Could some of this free-to-play stuff go too far?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've definitely seen free-to-play games that kind of take advantage of its users too much to kind of dangle an exclusive cherry that you really have to pay for. I think that's a lot of concerns whenever we do see new free-to-play games come out. It's like, one, am I having to pay to win? Two, how much is this game giving me versus is it requiring me to give to it in order to get some sort of good experience? And Nintendo's space in mobile games is a little bit weird since they kind of have been trying to push some new IPs, but also pull from old ones. Like they have their Mario game, they have their Animal Crossing game, which are very loved things within the Nintendo space. And I think there's always that little hesitation to see, it's like, okay, so we're getting this for free, but what does this require from me? And kind of go back to Tim's point about the hardcore gamers and not really accepting kind of mobile games as a really authentic space for video games, or at least kind of like a top tier space for that. I think there's always a hesitation there. And I guess seeing Nintendo's messaging about that is really curious because I think it's more, the way I read it was, hey guys, please remember that we want this to be more of a balanced experience for what you put in isn't excessive, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
Because we've definitely seen that with some of their games where it's definitely got that loot box feel. It's like, hey, you want this character, it's available for a limited time, but you have to buy this box to keep getting it, and you might not get it unless you spend so much money or you put so much time in to unlock that. So I could see them maybe being a little concerned about the quality there, because Nintendo, first and foremost, is very much about the quality of their games. And I could see them maybe saying that a little bit more internally, so I'm very surprised that it came out externally for us to hear.
Bruce, jump in here. What's your take?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear all of her answer.
We were talking about Nintendo's move to say to some of the developers who work with them on smartphone games, hey, don't crank up the incentives so much that we end up squeezing too much money out of the gamers here. I guess the implication being we don't want them to hate us or feel taken.
Free-to-play is definitely an advantage, and we've seen that in a number of esports, and it's something that obviously helped Fortnite in the Battle Royale mode. But look, video gaming's been around since, the 60s, and it's taken different forms. And ultimately what it gets down to is, the title. If the title and the gameplay work and it's free to play, you're going to see the kind of ramp up that you did see on Fortnite as well as on Apex. And if you have cross-platform access, it's going to obviously give you more points of entry than you used to be able to have before when you were stuck in front of a console.
Yeah. Spoken by a man who has seen that potential early. Bruce, thanks for being with us. Once again, this is Fort Knox. We are talking about this new trend in gaming, Battle Royale, Fortnite, Apex Legends, and just different incentives and ways to design games. Joining me now here at the NASDAQ market site in Times Square is Rick Heitzman, FirstMark founder and partner and early investor in Pinterest, DraftKings, Airbnb, and Riot Games, the developer behind League of Legends. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
What's your take on this Battle Royale age we've entered into? We started off talking about how Apex in just a month has racked up 50 million registered users, kind of in the wake of Fortnite. Is this some fundamental shift that we've seen in gaming, and what do you think it is?
I think it's a fundamental shift. There's a couple different aspects that we've seen create this. First, that games have become social. I know you've talked about you're playing with your friends, you're playing with your family. I have a 14-year-old son. It's how he communicates with all of his friends. And they're on a Discord server talking about what game was playing, Ninja was doing what. So there's a social element to it. The barriers to entry have declined. So you don't need to convince your mom or convince your wife to buy you a console and put a disc in. It's free to play on the game in a minute. So anyone can get in, and that's where your friends are. And it's really taking away other media formats. If you look at that 18 to 35 demographic, no one's watching broadcast TV from 8 to 10 or 7 to 10 a.m. or p.m. It's Twitch, it's YouTube, and it's gaming. And that's their media consumption.
So are people designing games differently over the last 18 months because of this? And if so, how?
I would say the arc is longer. It's probably been 10 years, but a lot of them are high-quality games that take a while to get out. I think the guys at Riot Games had it exactly right 10 years ago when they said the key, now that you have connected devices, and that could be a phone, it could be a PC, it could be a console, is that it's going to be social. And the most important element of a game is going to be no different than pick up basketball. It's going to be the social elements which make it fun. And whether that's a battle royale format, whether that's a MOBA, or whether that's whatever format you have, you want to have it be highly competitive, highly social, and highly achievement oriented. So you could say, no different than a pickup basketball or soccer game. I'm playing with my friends or against my friends. I'm getting my bragging rights.
Tim, when the history of this era of gaming is written, what are going to be the mile markers, kind of those touchstones? I mean, how important is League of Legends? How important is what Riot did? How important is Fortnite and Apex?
Yeah, and you go to like Counter-Strike as well, CSGO. If you're talking about games as service as well, you would have to go back to the MMOs as well, like WoW and stuff, which brings that social aspect in we've been talking about. But I think, like...
I mean, I remember playing Marathon in college in between studying for finals.
Games have always been social, but the technology is what enables it now. Like the mention of Discord, Twitch and YouTube. Like, going back to what you were saying about are people designing for these mediums now? Absolutely, yes. That one of the fundamental reasons why Battle Royale is as successful as it is because it's inherently spectatable. You know, the simple notion of 100 people being whittled down to one is why the film The Hunger Games is cool to watch, right? Because it's the drama and the tension inherent in it. And those platforms enable you to share with your friends or just socially, like, amazing moments, like no-scope kills, or like you clutching up like one guy against three and managing to win the round against all odds. You know, those moments go viral, and they make careers for guys like Ninja and Dr. Disrespect and Real Crafty, and that they become heroes to these people because they're able to show the skill gap in these games as well. Like, going back to what, you know, the reference to pick up basketball and soccer, like, you know, you want to be like the equivalent of, you know, the Messi type character or the Ronaldo type character, and there are these guys for gaming who are just, you know, monsters, right? They're consistently winning game after game after game, and people want to watch their highlight reels.
Yeah, and I think the games are also digestible. That you can jump in, you can watch your highlight reel, no different than SportsCenter. Here are the 5 best kills. You can watch a whole arc, which is 20 minutes. It's not, you know, our old, you know, discs in a computer. You're paying for 8 hours, or the infinite universe of a World of Warcraft. People's attention spans have shrunk. Video has made it more digestible. So it's really just finding the format that it really hits the nail on the head with this generation.
We're going to close this out here. Do you think Apex catches Fortnite, either in terms of just raw registered users or in terms of engagement, you know, concurrent users, where the heat actually is? And what do you think will determine that one way or the other?
I think it certainly has potential. My biggest thing is I think we kind of have to wait, right? I mean, it's only been out for maybe a month. We still haven't seen its first battle pass or how they want to kind of move forward with monetization past the premium currency that you can buy. And I think it just comes down to that time and seeing how long that player base actually wants to stick around. I think that was one of the biggest surprises about Fortnite was how it not only was hugely popular after PUBG kind of set this precedent of like what a battle royale could be, but then just kept iterating and making it more and more exciting and kind of just keeping that momentum going. And I think that iteration was such a huge part. And the big question is, what does Respawn have to kind of keep matching that pace that Fortnite kind of established? And I'm just super curious to see what they have to offer. Like, they've already said that they're going to have new characters coming, which is a different kind of thing that Fortnite doesn't necessarily have. And also, of course, again, their battle pass.
Tim, in kind of a proud dad moment for me, I told my 10-year-old about Apex Legends. He didn't know. Now, granted, he's never played Fortnite, but it's kind of like a cultural thing around his school in the 5th grade. Nobody was talking about Apex. I was like, Nathan, have you heard about Apex? It's huge. It's like the next Fortnite. And Dad was cool for him. So what do you think is going to happen here, Tim?
I mean, I think the genre is undoubtedly here to stay. I think it's been incredibly volatile and in flux, and you'd be crazy to bet against both Fortnite and Apex seeing continued success. I think, like, the point made earlier was correct. Like, one game doesn't have to necessarily completely cannibalize and kill the other. There's probably room for two, in the same way that there's room for League and Dota 2, right, in the MOBA space. But there's probably not room for 5 or 6. So I think, you know, there's going to be a lot of people trying to move in. I expect at E3 you'll see still more Battle Royale games announced this year, but it would be a brave person, I think, to go against these two right now.
Rick, what do you think, and which one of these games is better for esports in its model?
In its current model, I'd probably say they're equal. I think that there's enough influencers on Fortnite that you're going to have to pull people away. There's the first mover advantage. But I see games like Spellbreak, and you can look at the Discord servers when you see heat building for those games, especially going into GDC, and you probably look at Spellbreak, and there's a next version of folks who are going to pull around. But I think there's 3 games, and if you look at teenage consumption patterns, they're going to have their friends, they're going to follow Ninja, whatever game Ninja's playing, whatever they see is cool, whatever patch has the best new weapon. So there's room for a couple of different players that could be very, very large businesses.
Do you think that this becomes the new draw at E3? Because it seems like a lot of companies are not doing, the console makers aren't doing E3 at the scale that they used to. Had me wondering, well, is E3 dead? But now, I mean, if Ninja shows up at E3, if there's a big battle royale thing happening there, maybe it's even bigger.
What's how you define E3? E3 was for a lot of years was an EA thing, right? So EA has all the footprint, has all the money in the world to make it about Apex and not make it about Madden or some of their legacy titles. There's no Red Dead coming, so instead of the long arc Rockstar type games, you're going to see maybe more room for this the pickup game type Spellbreak or someone like that to push in, and you're going to see more smaller games with slightly different formats, but in the Battle Royale style, emerge in the next year.
And maybe some dance competitions.
Dance Revolution 2020 coming back.
Like Fortnite edition. Miranda, thank you so much for being here with me. This has been Fort Knox, rich ideas, powerful people, talking about this new wave in gaming. Up next on the podcast, Sienna's CEO. Anyway, we will see you next week with another show. See you next time.